The first one I want to talk about is the emergency management vote that I took. So Governor Kelly's emergency declaration was going to end on January 26th, a couple days ago. And so if she was asking the legislature to extend her disaster declaration, I ended up voting for it, and I want to take a minute to explain why. On May 21st, the last day of the last session, I was on the lawn of the Capitol demanding that we do something to put a check on the governor's emergency powers, because the emergency statute was not written for 11 months of COVID. The emergency statute was written for a tornado or a flood, when you need an executive that can quickly cut through red tape to get help where it needs to be, right? It was not written for 11 months of prolonged COVID, and it gave the governor a lot of powers with really no checks on that power. In a republic, in a democracy, in our form of government, no one person wields unlimited power. That's how our Constitution's written. That's how the U.S. Constitution's written. Every person in our government has a check on their power, and that's what keeps us free. And so on May 21st, I was out there with 200 of my closest friends that I just met, most of them, demanding that the legislature do something to put a check on her power. They did that. What they did do was they added a stipulation that counties could opt out of her executive orders. It wasn't perfect. It's not the best mechanism, but it was a mechanism that they could quickly put in place to put a check on her power. And that's why we have the governor has issued a mandatory mask order, but our county opted out of it. Now our city has made their own ordinance, which they have the power to do under home rule, whether I personally like it or not. They have the power to do that. But the governor's orders, the county has the ability to opt out of. That statute was at risk if we didn't extend the disaster declaration, because a lot of people, when they were writing me, their impression was, well, if we don't extend her disaster declaration, this is just all over. She won't be able to give any executive orders. She won't be able to do any of the things she was doing before, and all the restrictions will be lifted, and we'll be back to normal. And that's not true, because if we had not extended her disaster declaration, the next day she would have just declared another disaster, which is what she was doing with the legislature over and over again until we got that law in June that gave the counties the ability to opt out. So in order to preserve that check on her power, we had to extend the disaster declaration. But that was not, frankly, good enough for me. I still was not going to extend it unless we did something to end her power to close businesses or close churches. Because according to that law that was passed in June that gave the counties the ability to opt out of her orders, she was able to close businesses with still no check on her power for 15 days. She could have shut down the entire state for 15 days, and nobody could have done anything about it until that 15 days was over. And I think that there's mounting evidence that the shutdowns did more harm than good, because people still have to eat, and they still have to go to Walmart and get the groceries, and Walmart's less safe than a lot of those small businesses that she would be able to shut down. And so I was adamant that I would not vote, and a number of other legislators were adamant that we would not vote to extend her disaster declaration until there were additional limits put in her power that she could not shut down businesses and churches. And we were able to get that in the statute. And so it was really not a party line vote to extend the disaster declaration. It was bipartisan. There was single digit legislators that did not vote to extend her disaster declaration with the continuation of the county's ability to opt out and the limit on her ability to shut down businesses and churches. We're not done. What we really need is to go back to the emergency management statute and update it for these long-term disasters. So if there's a COVID-21, God forbid, if there's a COVID-21 or there's some other kind of long-term disaster, we're not going through all this over again.